Okay, so now I want to look at custom applications and what we can do within Speak. So to do so, I've created two applications and I'm going to look into them a bit more. So firstly, I want to show you what we can do with Knockout. To do so, I'm going to show you an application I created to talk to and update CRM, as well as update cycle from CRM itself. I created a number of different components for this, and I did this specifically for tutorial purposes, so the design of them are pretty basic and simple, but hopefully it can show you some of the power behind Knockout. So I'm just going to minimize this and go to the actual application itself. So I have it open here. Now unfortunately the CRM site it was linked up to has been taken down, so it won't actually update it anymore. However, the logic was fairly simple. You created a process to either update Sitecore or update CRM from Sitecore, and it was fairly simple. So this is a list control, but unlike the previous list control, I have it set to type icon fields to show, to show the icon fields. So that way, instead of getting a list of different columns, it will actually show the icons themselves, like so. So this is the standard component. So we will just select update CRM entity and enter the process name, update entity contact. So we'll create that process. Now here we can select the entity type that we want to update, so we have a whole bunch of different ones, and I'm going to select the contact entity, so that would be the CRM object we want to update, and then the particular field. So again, it would be the email address one field, and where it contains the value. None of this really matters because it's not connected to that CRM service anymore. So as well as that, we have the second component. So this top component I created as a custom component, and I did it specifically just to play around with Ajax and autofill. And the second one is another custom component, but it actually uses two of the standard Sitecore Speak components, which is this tree list here and this select button. So these two components here I didn't create, but I did integrate them with this component. So in this case we can select a specific item that we want to update. So I think I had an item somewhere. I think it was this one here, or it doesn't really matter, so we can select that and it will update this section to the left, this column to the left with whatever we choose. So if we chose that or that, it would update it like so. So we're happy with that, just like that. Now we get to map the data. So because we just pulled in this information here, we'll need to refresh the fields, and then based off whatever we chose here, the contact entity as well as that item, what it will do is it will generate a list of different fields that we can choose from. So where this cycle contact info and the field name or description, whatever it is, this is going to match the field in CRM of the contact. I think there is one for description somewhere. I'm not really sure. So in that case, you can type it in. Now the user could add as many fields and map as many fields as they wanted, like so, and like so. Likewise, they can remove them. So essentially we have a simple mapping tool between Sitecore and CRM, and then we could save it and start the process. Now because it isn't linked up, we can't start it, which is unfortunate, but it does work in a actual scenario. As well as that, our first tab that we had will now have this entity that we created. So I could even create another one. Sitecore, and we'll save that, and likewise it will now display this. So this is my own list control So as I mentioned before, I just created this more so for a tutorial and a way to explain how it can be done. So in saying that, what I might do now is switch over to PowerPoint and go through some of the logic. So I'll just open it back up. So displaying data. So this is kind of going through the logic of this list control that you saw at the start, where we listed a number of different components. So it's fairly simple. Essentially, in the page code at the start, I reference the actual item itself, and I call this method get fetch items of a GUID. This will essentially pull the child items of that GUID ID, and it will pull a name as well as an icon, and then a list of fields that I specify here, which is just a JSON object, so item, CRM entity type, and was successful. And so then that's simply an Ajax or a HTTP GET call using jQuery, as you saw in the previous video, and then it will pull back that list of child items as well as the fields, and then we can bind them like so in Knockout. The actual item it pulls back is a JSON item. Knockout does expect JSON for all its data binding, so it is recommended to do most of the to build your Speak application to handle and to pass around JSON objects. And so once it returns that that JSON object of all those items, I can bind this for each loop, for each binding, call this for each binding, and loop through each of the items like so. Now I'll look at the actual code here. So in the page code, we call get children of a specific ID of an item. In this get children, we have a list of fields that we want to pull back. And then we make this jQuery call to get the children with icon of that ID and those fields, and it'll pull it back into this JSON object, which we store in this field called items. So this is just like my field I created before called my field or my field 2. I have one set called items, and I store JSON object of all these items. Then in Knockout, I bind, or I set the for each binding to that items field, and that means anytime that is updated, it'll go through much like an ASP repeater would, and it'll loop through and make these additional bindings here. So for each item, I'll bind the HTML as Cycle returns icons as HTML elements. So I use the HTML binding to update the icon, text for the name, and then for each of the additional fields we loop through and I bind the key and value properties. So it's fairly simple. Much like a repeater, we just loop through a series of JSON objects and we bind the fields or the properties like so. The second one I want to look at is integration. So there's a couple of things I want to go into in this. So firstly, we did see that we had a tree list component as well as a select button. These weren't components I created. These are standard Cycle Speak components. I just integrated them, and I did so by simply creating this placeholder. So the placeholder just references the current rendering, so this entire rendering, ID plus, and then the placeholder name. So in your layout, you'll see this component dot header placeholder, and you'll be able to insert components onto that. As well as that, I have one for the tree list as well as a button. Now, I had some additional logic behind this, where anytime the user selected one of these items here in this tree list, it would update a field with whatever that ID was. So that I would have a GUID of each ID or the ID that a user selected, and then when they hit that select button, I could pull back the list of fields of that item. So if I look at the code, we have this select item checked, which is bound so that every time a user checks one of those boxes, this will be called, and we'll update this field called source ID with the ID. of the associated checkbox. And likewise, when the user clicks on the button, we'll get that ID that we just stored, and we will call this getFields method. And then this will pull back the relevant fields of that item from the ID that the user clicked. So there's the logic there. Now, in addition to that, I just want to quickly touch on what some other things Knockout can do. In addition to binding text and HTML, we can actually bind the style elements. So the entire component can be set to invisible or visible, or they have the CSS display set to true or false based on another component. So I could update this through another component. Thus I could hide the entire component if I wanted to. As well as that, we can also insert these placeholders so that we can insert other components into our component. Finally, dynamic components. I'd probably recommend my blog post on this. I'll just quickly go through it. We have page code, which gets a gets an item which has a field which stores JSON in that field. So it returns that field and sets it into a property, which then I loop through, and then for each one of those I display a drop down box, a text box, and then a text box and another drop down box. As well as that, I have a button remove for every one of those fields that is greater than 0, so that way the user can remove fields but they can't remove that first field. So the actual object itself, I have a field called CRM, or a JSON field called CRM, as well as the value, and one called cycle as well as value. And so that way I can allow the user to select or edit it with a text box as well as a drop down. And again, I'd recommend looking at the blog post. It will make it a lot clearer, but the logic is fairly standard. We just loop through in each one of these Java JSON objects within that series. We will display a text box as well as a drop down as well as a button where the button is greater than 0. So in the code as well, I'll probably go back onto this one. So the actual I did insert an event on here so that whenever the user updates this text box will be updated. So if we look at the actual code as well, we can see the event change for the drop down. We will call a JavaScript function which will pass through the element and the data, and then we can update the sibling, which will be the text box its value with whatever we just selected. So we can see the property sc equals selected, and that will update it like so. As well as that, we only display the rendering or output that rendering button if the object's index, so each one of those JSON objects, is greater than 0. So that way the user can remove it for all of those fields except for the first one. I would recommend reading my blog post, which should be below on my site. Now finally, what you can do with required.js. In this I probably won't go through the logic as much, I'll just have some quick demonstrations. So just get it fixed up. Okay. Now, prior to 8.0, the Cycle Launchpad was pretty basic. The way it worked is it was a Speak application, and it had a folder called Shortcuts, and in that Shortcuts folder you could insert items or shortcut items. This would have an icon, a tooltip, a title, and the actual Speak application ID. So for each one of those, it would display the icon like so and allow the user to open it. It's fairly simple. I wanted to extend upon this, and I wanted to do it with a single component. Now I wanted to do it like so, just to kind of give people the understanding of what, or the power behind Speak and what they can do. So to do so, I've used two different or I guess two separate JavaScript libraries. One was called Gridster, which allows Windows 7 like tile management, and the other was chart.js. So I've got it over here. the dashboard page. If I just open up my Visual Studio, I'll show you that we have this live dashboard application and with shortcuts, and then we list a range of different Speak applications. For each one of those applications, I'll just refresh this. We will have a list of shortcuts we can add, so I'll just unlock my dashboard here and I can now add these shortcuts like so. I can remove them as well and then add it back. Okay, so very cool. Gridster allows us to do this management of these tiles like so. So now we can lock it and then open one of them up. I won't though because it will exit out of this. So the second part of that I wanted to look at was having live updates, so live tiles, much like Windows 7. So I implemented some additional ones, and I'll just use this network stats as well as random values, I guess. And what this will do is update these tiles with updated data constantly. So this network stats will be based off .NET network class, and this is just random values that are generated. Okay, so pretty simple. It allows us to have live updates to our tiles, and again we can move it across and do this management. Finally, I implemented chart.js, which provides us with charts. So if I insert these charts here, we can see that we have these fancy looking JavaScript charts, which we can insert onto our dashboard to provide charts. Now I did have some actual data, but it was based off the CRM, and unfortunately I'm not connected to the CRM because I've been removed, so I can't use that anymore. But as you can see with random data, it's essentially what you'd see, but these would be specific to those applications. And likewise, I can lock it again, I can move this around and shuffle it thanks to Gridster, and make it a bit neater. So I'll put that back there. Okay, and we'll lock it, and it will perform the updates. So all of this is a single Speak component. If you're wondering what you can do with a Speak component, there's quite a lot you can do. This was merely created to show some of the power behind it. Finally, I have created another demo application, which I'll show you, the config manager. It's a very simple application, allowing users to view and edit their config files. It uses the media library to pull the config file in, but it could easily just pull the file directly from the file system. So we load that in, and then it'll display this XML document, this configuration document, in a simple tree. So this kind of emulates that tree view that you saw in the components. So this is another idea for a Speak application. There's no real limit on what you want to do, but there's a lot you can do. So that's it. I might just switch back to my presentation. So we saw Gridster, we implemented Gridster, as well as that we had charts with chart.js. Future updates, so 1.2, 7.5 and 8 have this. It's the code itself, or components, and the page code is a lot cleaner. We can see here that we just have the reference to whatever dependency JavaScript files, as well as a simple initialize and the additional methods. We can have property notation, much like CS or .NET, C#, sorry. So we set the value through set. We can also just set the property text directly with that dot notation. We can have complex properties, so one property can be the composite of a number of different ones. So we have first name, last name, and then we create a third one called full name, based off the first name and last name. And we have So we can have composite components, so one component can be a collection of other components. In Cycle 8, you'll see this through the through the web edit ribbon. So when you open the Experience Explorer, the ribbon itself is a composite component, or a Speak application, which is built up of a number of components, blogs. Martina has a good blog on getting started with Speak. Jacob also has a great blog on Speak, and that is my blog. You can also look at Jacob's YouTube video, and there is another blog that I don't have here by Pierre, who's one of the creators along with Jacob, so I'd recommend checking that out. And obviously Cycle 8 have improved their dashboard, and it is Speakified, so a lot of Cycle 8 has been moved into Speak, and it will continue going that way, as you can see. Okay.